morning again. It's 8:43. Joining me is sketch writer and columnist for the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant, and political editor of HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield. Thank you so much. Nice to see you again. Let's kick off, Madeline, with a story you found in the Times about university students having fewer teaching staff, declining in quality, and less choice in what they do. What's going on with our universities?
Well, it's a good question. A lot is going on with our universities right now, and I think we're going to have many, many more stories like this because there is clearly a massive problem of funding of courses. So the Times is reporting that universities are having to cut back on quite a bit of what they do because there has been a shortfall in the number of foreign students who obviously pay much higher fees and therefore kind of cross-subsidise domestic students. So they're having to cut back on certain courses after a big drop in these students. And this is partly to do with crackdowns on visas, but also economic downturns in other countries, particularly Nigeria, which is currently having a currency crisis and accounts for an awful lot of foreign students in Britain. And I think it really shows actually how very unsustainable things are just now, because the student fees trebled under the coalition.
They can't put those up anymore, surely.
No, they can't put those up anymore. But also just the sheer number of people now going to university. I think the sector has expanded so dramatically that it's not economically sustainable for 50% of school leavers to be going to university. And it's the industry. It's a huge industry, and now a big global export of Britons. So it's like, how do they square the circle? I think either there's going to have to be a big injection of cash into the sector, or we're going to universities will start going bust.
Yeah, I mean, it shows that the business model was never sustainable in the first place. If you have to rely on foreign students.
Well, that's it. And once that supply dries up, then they are really struggling. As Madeline says, then that money is so vital to subsidise the British students, and because they can't put those fees up anymore, politically, we saw what happened to the Lib Dems.
Yes. Well, they can't anyway, because the kids will just not go to university. It gets any more expensive.
So but then that moves on to, does a conversation have to be had? Should so many be going to university? I mean, that was a big advance under the last Labour government, was the expansion in the number of people going into higher education, which is seen as a good thing. But if it's inadvertently going to lead to the universities closing, the universities just don't have the capacity to do it, then you have to have a conversation about, well, what did we want these children to be doing when they're leaving school if they're not going into higher education?
Well, we heard from a young man yesterday on the programme who said, if you go to university, you get a degree, you expect to walk into a highly paid job.
Well, that's how to sell it to them, isn't it?
But that's not realistic either.
It's a scam. It's a hustle. And I think that it's mis-selling a product to a whole generation of young people. I mean, the idea that you could expand degrees by that amount without devaluing the quality of the qualification itself. And I think a lot of the expansion of this sector is being funded by the eye-watering interest rates on the loans of students who often are getting a very, very bad deal for money.
Well, exactly. I mean, since COVID, they haven't exactly had the best care in universities either.
No, exactly. And you're right. That is another good point. Is I've called them kids because they're all kids to me. But when they're leaving, when they're graduating, these enormous debts that they can probably never hope to pay off. And then you think, well, how on earth are they going to get on the property ladder if they can somehow cobble together the money for a deposit?
Well, you ask my sons and they will get very bitter about that.
Oh, no, I don't blame them.
And also the taxpayer has a right to be fed up, because any outstanding loans are then forgiven by the taxpayer after a certain amount of time. I think it's a false economy. And if universities are having to either become backdoor visa mills, or in some cases, which is already happening, and if you ask academics privately, they will tell you that there is discrimination in favour of international students, particularly at the master's level. I think there is a feeling that you can be a bit less rigorous because that subsidises the BA level. But if that is what your business model hinges on, that's neither desirable nor sustainable.
No, that's right. Oh, let's cheer ourselves up even more by talking about Rwanda.
Yeah, so an interesting story in The Guardian that, this is probably the final thing that Rishi Sunak is clinging to, that he could hopefully, the plan is still to get flights off to Rwanda in the spring. And it all hinges on this Safety for Rwanda bill currently going through Parliament. Now, it had been expected that it would clear Parliament before Easter at the end of the month, and then that would then allow these flights to take off potentially, and then that would then be a win for Rishi Sunak. What they're saying now is it could potentially be delayed until after Easter. So it's coming back to the Commons next week. They're trying to overturn the amendments to the bill which were made in the Lords in recent week, or last week, the week before. But it was expected then that it would then clear Parliament by Easter, as I say, but there's nothing scheduled for it.
Easter's only a couple of weeks away now.
A couple of weeks away, so there's nothing scheduled for the final week of Parliament, which week beginning the 26th. So they're saying, well, if it doesn't clear, then again, this will be another yet more pressure on Rishi Sunak, because a lot of his MPs are saying, right, you've got to get this over the line. And if you can't even do that, then
I don't see how he can.
What is the point of it?
It's actually crazy. I think this is a really good example of how Rishi Sunak is just struggling to get past the legacy of his predecessors.
But wouldn't anyone else as well?
This is
I mean, if Penny Mordaunt suddenly becomes Prime Minister...
she won't have it any easier. I mean, it's almost exactly 2 years since Priti Patel was Home Secretary, that's how long ago it was, signed the deal with Rwanda to get Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister at the time. I mean, it's remarkable that not a single face
Rwanda became a bit of almost like a purity test during the Tory leadership race, where you had to say, we mean business on the boats, which matters greatly to our voters, rightly. We mean business, that's the way of proving it. But it meant that I think the big mistake was to make it front and centre of their offering, because it's actually not the only thing they're trying to do when it comes to the Channel boats.
No, but this is now a stick with which to beat them now, isn't it?
Exactly.
What about Tom Cruise? Now, we've been talking all morning about the possible traffic chaos that's going to be caused by this section of the M25 being closed, as it is now, until Monday morning. But Tom Cruise has found a unique way around this, because he can afford to, I guess.
Well, it's very Mission Impossible, the way. I like that going across the motorway is Mission Impossible nowadays, but he's hiring out helicopters to transport the whole of the cast and crew to Longcross Studios in Surrey, where they've been filming.
So he must be filming Mission Impossible 28 or something there.
It's a great headline, great pun.
Mission Impassable, says The Sun.
Oh, very good.
Bravo. Bravo.
Yeah,
so he's filming in the area, doesn't want to risk... I suppose it would cost a fortune, actually, if his camera crew couldn't get to where and all the cast and everybody else couldn't get to where they need to be.
Yeah.
And it's cheaper to hire a load of helicopters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The film industry is huge for the UK economy as well. It is.
Massive.
They still, these big Hollywood blockbusters still get filmed in this country, so you have to make it as easy for them as possible.
Good old Tom Cruise for keeping
I'm sure
going.
for Mission Impossible, a few helicopters is very minor ducats in the grand scheme.
I'm sure they've got them anyway. Absolutely.
Yes, practicing.
Before we run out of time, and it is something we're going to touch on in the next hour, but in the Daily Mail, Richard Kay, who of course is the reporter who used to know Princess Diana extremely well, and really knows his stuff, I think, about the royals, he said the royal family is not quite at the 11th hour, but they're teetering on the brink of collapse. What do you think, Madeleine?
I think it's really... As a monarchist, I read this article and it made me quite worried, because actually for me, I was thinking everyone's overreacting to the Kate photo. We've gone a bit mad. It's all conspiracy theories. But he makes a really good point that this is... it was actually quite avoidable with some kind of minor stage management, and a sort of decent, coherent operation would not have allowed something like this to happen. And of course, the ongoing absence of the King, but also now Kate, who are basically... two of the boss himself, but also, the most popular member of the royal family, Kate, for them to be absent, it's created this real power vacuum. And without them setting a strong narrative from Buckingham Palace...
And they're not setting a strong narrative at the moment.
No,
it's a sort of void, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, yeah,
exactly.
we were just saying, weren't we, that, the Queen going, it seems to have just precipitated this sort of chaos and collapse in authority, organisation, and it just shows how she was clearly, although she was probably an elderly woman, she was still very much in charge, and she was holding the whole thing, keeping the show on the road, really.
Yeah.
And now she's gone, the whole thing is just...
But I think, for example, that when that transition first happened, when the late Queen died, a lot of people thought, oh, this is toast for the royal family. The King will never be able to... But actually, he stepped into the role remarkably well. His speech comforted people. It felt like a very, comforting transition from one thing to another. And also Queen Camilla felt plausible in a way that nobody in the 90s would have expected. But now in this absence, in this void, people are starting to fill it with speculation, conspiracy theory. And, there are questions about you know, for example, why wasn't Kate wearing her wedding ring? These are
I know, that
legitimate
worries
questions.
me.
Yes.
I don't know why, but it really worries me.
It does.
But also, how come somebody somewhere decided that Kate should take the rap for the badly doctored photograph? I mean, it's like the rest of the palace stood off and said, "Oh, let her apologise."
Well, also, she obviously didn't take the picture.
No.
She's in the picture, so it was William took the picture.
Well, that's what we're told.
And is the idea that he took the picture and then she was messing about on Photoshop and didn't get it quite right? I mean, you're right, she ended up having to take the rap for it.
And make an apology for something that she shouldn't have had to apologise for.
It might be that she was trying to do the honourable thing and, you know, not blaming a subordinate or something. So there was perhaps a
Richard Kay makes the point that it feels like the monarchy is slightly like a rudderless ship at the moment. And he makes the point as well is that the country feels a bit like that at the moment, with a prime minister who could be toppled within days. We've got to leave it there because we're running out of time. Don't go away, though. Plenty more to come. You're watching Breakfast here on GB News.